My parents died in a car accident when I was extremely young. I was probably only a year or so old. I was involved in it, in fact, but was luckily spared. I don't have any memory of it, or any memory of my parents. My only frame of reference for them is pictures. And it might sound bad, but none of them exactly rang a bell for me, or gave me the innate feeling of this is my family. So, while I did feel bad for them in the sense that their lives were taken so soon in such a violent manner, to me, they were just strangers, and I didn't particularly miss them. Still, sometimes I wondered what my life would have been like had they made it out okay, because it would have been entirely different. After the accident, I was taken care of by my grandfather, and I was raised with an unconventional lifestyle. He was divorced and estranged from my grandmother, and he didn't have any siblings. So, for most of my life, it was really just me and him, and whoever happened to pass through. That wasn't the odd part, though. My grandfather was a long-retired Navy veteran, but his love of the water stuck with him. I had spent most of my childhood alternating between staying in hotels and boats, and traveled down all sorts of waterways in the United States and Canada. Although my granddad was technically retired, he took on all sorts of jobs at ports just in order to maintain a source of income, and probably to keep his sanity too. He was an active man and hated staying in one place all the time, which is why nobody stuck with us in the long term. When I was 12, we were down in Oklahoma. It was the beginning of July, and although I was used to all sorts of weather conditions at this point, the heat and humidity that came down upon us was damn near unbearable. At first, I tried to sleep in a motel bed, but at that point, I'd grown so accustomed to sleeping in boats that I had trouble falling asleep unless I could feel water rocking the floor back and forth. It was like the opposite of seasickness. It was too still, too motionless. My grandfather got fed up with tossing and turning and allowed me to go back to the docks so I could sleep in the boat, figuring I was old enough to be left alone at this point. It was still uncomfortably hot and humid, but the rocking of the boat lulled me to sleep. I was a glorified baby who needed his cradle. However, after some time, I was awoken by the sound of a swishing in the water nearby. I assumed it had to be a fish, but the noises sounded far too heavy and forceful for that. I went outside and went to the side of the boat where most of the sounds were coming from. I checked over the railing, and through the dim light that the moon provided, I could make out the silhouette of what appeared to be a massive octopus sitting next to the boat, to the point where the top of its head actually poked out of the water. You could imagine my confusion in that very moment. Even if I wasn't raised on lakes and seas, any kid would know that octopi aren't freshwater creatures. There was no reason I should be seeing one in the wild in the middle of America. As soon as I leaned in to try and get a better look at it, it had swam away in the blink of an eye, the force of its movement rocking the boat a bit more some moments later. I wanted to go and tell my grandfather about my discovery, but I didn't want to wake him up, so I waited until he came back and got me the next morning. We went to dine at a small restaurant where I brought up what I had spotted. Before he even had a chance to say his piece, the people in the next table chimed in. The person who spoke up first was an older man. He said that the octopus, or that perhaps it was an entire species, plagued lakes and rivers across the state. He blamed it for the drowning of his black lab some years prior. My grandfather, skeptical, and before I knew it, a full-blown debate was occurring in the restaurant. Apparently, townsfolk here were pretty divided on whether or not this thing was real. I guess it was like another Bigfoot. Some people believe, and others don't. I was certain of what I saw, though, but my grandfather insisted that it was a dream. He said he'd seen far too many things on the water to believe something as silly as a massive freshwater octopus in the middle of the United States and nowhere else. In all fairness, the debate never got out of hand, for the most part. It just was a friendly banter and people placing bets. But it did definitely get noisy enough to the point where the owner had asked us to quiet down. Since it was the morning of the 4th of July, after we left, we found the entire town was pretty busy doing things like selling fireworks, food, decorations, and jewelry. We spent the rest of the morning exploring the shops and markets, and I didn't bother to try and bring up the octopus again. As afternoon came, we headed back out towards the lake, where people were out on their boats and swimming, and the sky was filled with the sounds of radios playing and people laughing. Nobody had even noticed a little boy struggling to keep his head above the water, but I did. I shouted that he was drowning and needed help. My grandfather dove in and swam after him, and once he got to him, I screamed as he was pulled down under as well. By now, more people around me noticed what was going on and ran over to help. A few moments later, my grandfather resurfaced with the boy. Once they finally caught their breath, the boy started to bawl. One man took the boy from my grandfather's arms, and they took him onto a boat, my grandfather climbing aboard along with them, as he was likely too exhausted to swim back to shore. I tried my best to see what was going on, but all I could hear was the boy crying about how somebody, or something, had kept trying to drag him under. At first, this warranted a search from a bunch of people to see if another child had drowned and grabbed onto the boy in hopes to save themselves. However, when nobody was to be found, it turned into a witch hunt to find the responsible party. They figured some other kid was trying to be a prankster and scare the boy, but took it too far. My grandfather made it ashore by now, and he did not seem to be in the mood to talk. In fact, he appeared to be entirely disconnected from the moment. I don't know what to say or do, so I just watched a few games of beanbags until the sunset, when I made s'mores with the other kids as the adults prepared the fireworks showing. The people who were pissed about the person who tried to drown the boy were almost all drunk by now, and the memory already seemed to be shoved in the back of their minds. I could tell something was still haunting my grandfather, though. When night fell, it came time to light up the fireworks. My grandfather and I sat back in our boat to watch. After the show, he finally decided to speak up. He said that when he rescued the boy, the force that pulled him under the water was so strong that he knew it could not have been a person, and that when he kicked the perpetrator so that I would let go of the boy, its body felt squishy and slimy, almost like jelly. Upon boarding the boat, after rescuing the boy, he swore he noticed the imprint of suction cups wrapped around the boy's ankle, but didn't say anything as he was in too much shock. My grandfather could be a very stubborn man, but for the most part, he knew when to admit that he was wrong. He said he changed his mind and believed me. Upon hearing his story, I was a little scared to sleep on the boat that night, but he decided to stay with me just to make me feel better. I swore that I still heard the swishing and can feel sporadic hard waves hitting the boat, but I didn't dare move or say anything, as I hoped to trick the thing into thinking nobody was there. The night proceeded without incident, and by morning, we were back eating in the restaurant. People had regained interest in the near drowning that had happened the day before, and my grandfather told his piece. Some were still skeptical, but most seemed to believe him. I suppose my granddad just had a way with words. Those who were skeptical, however, did not display the same friendly banter they had the day before. They said that a kid nearly lost his life, and just because my grandfather saved him didn't mean it was okay for him to make up fairy tales and to try and romanticize or embellish the incident. My grandfather said he would never do such a thing, and soon enough, an argument had broken out between those who believed my grandfather and those who did not. The restaurant owners ultimately kicked us out for causing a ruckus, and upon exiting the building, a few of the folks around us told us that we had outstayed our welcome and needed to leave, having some food thrown at us in the process even. My grandfather and I knew it was pointless to try and make them believe us anymore, so we were back in the boat within minutes. From there, we left and never returned. My grandfather and I continued to sail together for 11 more years until he passed away from a stroke. There are plenty of interesting stories from that decade, but none of them came close to being as bizarre as the one I just told you. I decided to settle down from the sailor life, as it was simply not the same without him, and it took me a while to adjust to living on land, especially in only one place, but I managed to make it work. Like my granddad, I still had a love for the water and a general yearning to go back, but I feel as if I will be disappointed if I do. Regardless, despite my desires, I still find myself itching with curiosity when it comes to that creature. I wanted to see if it was still lurking in the waters, and I doubted anybody would recognize me if I returned to that lake, considering I have been an adult for quite some time now. Another part of me knows I should probably just let it be, because should I happen to come across it again, I would never be able to sleep that night without my grandfather beside me.